Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's online event, Spotlight on Asian American Art, Toshiko Takaezu. My name is Lauren, and I'm the distance learning educator here at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. And I'm joining you today from inside the museum in the Shapiro Family Courtyard. And with us today is my colleague Noni, who's a curator here at the museum. And she's joining us from inside the galleries in the Arts of the Americas, which is the part of the museum that you see just behind me. So welcome, Noni. Could you take a minute to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you so much, Lauren. And hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Noni Gadsden. I'm a curator in the Art of the Americas department here at the MFA. And I work with all things that are 3D in nature. So furniture, silver, ceramics, objects, sculpture of the Americas, which is North, Central, and South America. But today I am standing in our exhibition called Toshiko Takaezu, Shaping Abstraction. And I'm really excited to share a lot of this with you today.
Great. Thanks, Tony. So before we actually launch into the program, I just want to take a couple of minutes to go over some information with you about our program format. First, you can see and hear us. We cannot see or hear you. We do want to communicate with you during the program today. So please feel free to use the chat at any point throughout the program. And you can add your questions or your comments to the chat at any time. The chat is only visible to us, so we will keep our eye on the chat throughout the program and be sure to share back out any of your comments and also answer your questions along the way. So a transcript and closed captions for this program are available through Rev for Zoom live captions. So to enable the captions, you just need to go to the bottom of your Zoom window and click once on CC to start displaying live captions. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to let us know in the chat where you are joining us from. If you're part of a classroom group, if you're a student joining on your own, please also let us know your grade level as well. And while you all take a minute to put your information in the chat, I will share a little bit about the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, where we are joining you from. And I'm going to pull up some additional images for you. So the Museum of Fine Arts is located in Boston, Massachusetts. The museum's collections include art from ancient up to modern times. We have art from all over the world, as well as art by local artists. And we have all different types of art. So painting, sculpture, drawings, photography, jewelry, a collection of musical instruments, and much more. As a museum, we are focused on welcoming diverse perspectives and being a place where many different worldviews meet. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that down, and let's take a look at the chat. I actually don't see any responses in the chat, but I know folks are out there. So feel free to let us know in the chat. It's always just fun to know where everybody is joining from. So Boo, Hawaii. So welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah,
feel free to keep
Hawaii. All right.
Okay, here we go. New Hampshire, Hawaii. So some folks that are not too far away and others from a further distance. So welcome everyone. We're so glad you're with us. Again, feel free to post in the chat as we go through the program. So today is the first day of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So to kick off the month, we are focusing today on Asian American artist Toshiko Takaezu. So during our time today, we'll be looking closely at some of the artworks in the exhibition where Noni is at. We won't have time to cover everything in the exhibition, but we do hope this will spark your interest in learning more about this artist. And if you are close enough, we hope this might also prompt a visit to the museum to come see some of these artworks in person. The exhibition where Noni is right now, that's going to be on display through the end of September. So there's still plenty of time to come and see it in person. Also, if you would like to learn more about this artist after we sign off today, a great place to start is our teaching resources, which includes suggested websites, videos, books, all related to this artist. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for those teaching resources. If you're watching a recording of this program on our distance learning playlist, you'll find a link to those resources in the video description. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in our chat. And Noni, while I do that, will you get us started by telling us a little bit about Toshiko Takaezu?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. And I'm in the middle of the exhibition, and we just got a group of about 30 walking in. So if you hear noise in the background, this is live streamed. So, but I'm excited to talk to you about Toshiko Takaezu, who was born in 1922 in Hawaii. She was born to parents of Okinawan descent, and Okinawa is the southernmost island of Japan. And I wasn't familiar with this background before I came here, that the Okinawan, the country of Okinawa, that became Okinawa, the Ryukyu Kingdom, was overtaken by the Japanese, forcibly overtaken in 1879. And they told the Okinawan people that they were not to speak their own language, that they were not to follow their own customs anymore. So there was a discrimination against people who were Okinawan. And so Takaezu's parents, when they moved in the early 1900s to Hawaii, they sort of that discrimination followed with them because there's a large Japanese population and a large Okinawan population. So her parents decided to raise her as if she were Japanese. They gave her a Japanese name. They only spoke Japanese to their children, and they followed Japanese practices. And I share all of this because identity and who she was and what her various backgrounds are become a big part of Toshiko and her story. After she left the excuse us, we're just doing a few things here. After she left Hawaii, she moved to the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan to study, and then started a career throughout the United States, first teaching at the Cleveland Institute of Art and then Princeton University. And she made her home in New Jersey, and that's where she spent the majority of her career, was in New Jersey. But her birthplace of Hawaii stayed with her throughout. And we will see how some of the colors of Hawaii and the influence of Hawaii really becomes part of her story and her artwork.
All right. Well, one of the things that we hope you see as we go through today's program is how Toshiko Takaezu was an artist who had a very distinct approach to the way she created art, also just the way she lived her life. So she did a lot of experimenting. She pushed boundaries. She pioneered new methods in her artwork. So to begin talking about her as an artist, we want to kind of introduce her as someone who was creating abstract art. And like Noni mentioned, the exhibition is called Toshiko Takaezu Shaping Abstraction. So just, starting out, we want to take a minute and talk about what abstraction is. So we're all starting with the same understanding of what that term means.
So abstract art is the kind of art that isn't trying to represent a real thing. So it's not trying to show you a person or an object. It could be shapes or colors or simply a gesture, a paintbrush stroke or so forth. And one of the really cool things about Toshiko is that so much of what people think about abstraction is related to painting and things that's hanging on the wall. And Toshiko really pushed the boundaries of what we think of as American abstraction by doing this in 3D with her ceramics. And you can see some of her ceramics behind me, and then the image of Toshiko behind me in the here in the gallery, to sort of pushing abstraction off of the wall and into 3 dimensions.
All right. Well, I think now that we have a little bit of background on the artist and we're ready to kind of jump in and start looking at some of her artworks. And Noni, you just introduced, this idea of the ceramics that we can see in the photo behind you. And this is kind of what Toshiko was sort of most known for, or most recognized for, was her work with ceramics. So could you take a minute to kind of introduce us and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, and I'm trying to give you a little bit view of some of the closer view of some of the ceramics here. Toshiko was known for working in pottery, and pottery is clay. And when you can sculpt it and form it into different shapes, and then harden it by putting it in a kiln, and then you can paint it as you wish, which are glazes that again have to be fired in a kiln for the true colors of the glazes to come out. What else can I tell you about pottery? She worked with pottery throughout her career. She's primarily known for her work in pottery, and she worked in all sorts of shapes and sizes, as you can see in this picture behind me.
All right, I think we want to take a closer look at some of the pieces, get a better view. So I'm actually going to pull up a slide. And this slide has 3 artworks that are all in the exhibition. They're kind of spread out in the space. So we're going to pull them up so we can look at all 3 of them side by side and see some of the details a little bit better. So there we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So these are 3 pieces that come from different time periods. So Toshiko created the piece on the left and the middle in the 1950s, and the piece on the right was created in the 1980s. So we're going to ask you all just to take a moment and look closely at these 3 objects and think about the differences that you see between them. And then another question for you to consider is, as you're thinking about the differences that you notice, what might this show us about how her pottery practice evolved over time, how things changed? So take a minute to look, and feel free to put in the chat any observations about what you're seeing, any differences you're noticing that you'd like to point out. But also if you have any thoughts or ideas about what this might show us about how our practice changed over time. And I'll give you all just a moment to think about that and put any responses in the chat. Right. Well, I'll get us started. The chat's a little bit quiet. So, Noni, some of the things I'm noticing when I'm looking at these pieces, thinking about what I see that's different, are like the shapes. It's hard to tell in these pictures, like the sizes, but the shapes are different. The object on the left has 2 kind of long spouts on top, and I'm trying to imagine how someone might use that. Doesn't seem to be a handle of any sort. The one in the middle looks as if it has a lid on it, but maybe not a large opening. And then the one on the right seems completely different to me as far as like the shape, or it doesn't have handles or spouts or anything like that. So those are my initial observations and thoughts. If anybody else wants to jump in, feel free to add your thoughts to the chat, and I'll share those back out with the group. But Noni, do you want to?
Yeah, those are all great.
Those
are great observations, and really wonderful. And what these objects show is sort of a long transition from that. Toshiko was instrumental in moving pottery from a functional craft, making something that was functional that you could use on your table or use for to hold flowers or so forth, from moving it to a sculptural art form. And the centerpiece that you see on the slide is an example of a functional craft piece. And then the piece that you saw on the right is right behind me in real life here, down here on the platform. And you can see that there is no function to that piece at all. It is made as an art form and is meant to be looked at and appreciated for its beauty. And this is what Toshiko called her closed form. And she finally came to a point where she developed this closed form that she made in all sorts of different shapes and sizes over the course of 50 years. She kept exploring the same concept. But what she loved about it was how to use it to paint on top of it. So to merge the shape and the glazing and the colors that she was adding to it was something that she experimented with and found intriguing and inviting throughout her entire career. So you'll see these closed forms, and I'm going to try to switch my camera. Let's see. This is, forgive me if I, and here you give an example of a closed form. And here you see a very large example of a closed form. Here, Toshiko is making one on a wheel, and here she is closing up the top. So there's a tiny, tiny little opening at the top that would allow the gases to escape during firing. If the piece had been completely closed up and there was no way for the hot air to get out, the piece would have exploded in the kiln. But with this tiny opening at the top, the gases could escape. But then I started looking at these pictures and looking at objects like what's in front of me. And this piece is enormous. It's not nearly 5 feet tall. It's just a little shorter than I am. Well, how did Toshiko make this? Her arms are only so long. How would she form this kind of pottery? And she formed it on a turning wheel, like traditional pottery style. And she would make it up probably about the length of her arm, so about 14 inches or so, maybe 18. And then she would harden the clay just enough, because if the clay got too hard, you couldn't add any more clay to it. But if it was too soft, then it would collapse under the weight of adding more clay to it. And she continued to repeat this process over and over until she built the shape and the form that she wanted. It was like a day-long process to do something this big. But I just think about the amount of, it's a group effort. She had a lot of people helping her with these, just making the whole form. Then you fire it, and only after then does she get to paint on it and do the glazes on it. So.
Noni, I actually had a question or an observation thought come in on the chat, thinking back to those 3 pieces that I had up on the slide together. The one that we saw on the left that had the 2 spouts on it. Somebody was wondering, and I don't know if we know an answer to this or not, but somebody wondered if it could have been a container, a vessel that was made for a particular purpose, like perhaps a wedding. They were thinking about like a bride and a groom having like 2 spouts. I guess it's sort of like a shared vessel. I don't know if, do we know whether or not Toshiko intended that piece to actually be functional?
That is a very astute observation, because that is something that is very much the case in ancient Mayan work and in various cultures. A double-spouted pot is associated with weddings. You see it in Native American pottery as well, North American, Native American pottery as well. I don't believe Toshiko was looking at that, because she made spouts with three spouts, pots with 3 spouts, with 5 spouts. She was looking to sort of elongate the neck, to extend aspects of the piece, to try to figure out she was experimenting to get to a sculptural form. And that's where she ultimately led, is to eliminating the spouts completely and just leaving a very tiny opening in their place.
Okay, got it. Well, now that we've sort of introduced you to this concept of the closed form, and as Noni mentioned, once Toshiko came up with the closed form, she then began to sort of investigate and experiment with different glazing techniques as a way to paint these 3-dimensional forms. So Noni, could you just kind of introduce us to what some of those techniques or methods were that she used, and then we'll take a closer look at some examples.
Sure. So Toshiko, when she first started doing pottery, she primarily used a brush, which was pretty common to paint. And you can see some brush strokes on some of the objects that we have here in front of me. But then she started to experiment a little bit more in a way of pouring or splashing or dripping her glazes on the piece, sometimes dipping a piece into the glaze. And she even used a sort of makeshift little spray gun at times to spray. All this to try to get the different effects of the gestural movement, the movement of putting the clay on. She likened glazing to dancing. And what she loved was feeling like she was dancing around the object as she was glazing it.
Well, I want to give folks a chance to really look closely at a few of these pieces and think about those different techniques you were just describing. So I'm going to pull up again another slide that has 3 objects. All 3 of these are in the exhibition, but having them up here on the slide, I think you'll be able to notice some of those details a little better. So take a moment to look at these 3 examples. Again, Toshiko used a variety of techniques. So painting with a brush, dipping, pouring, splashing. So look at these 3 and think about what do you see here in these examples that might show us or tell us about the particular methods or tools she might have been using with these pieces. So I'll give you a second to look at those and put any thoughts or observations in the chat. All right, I'll give you a few more seconds to add any observations, things you're noticing in these 3 closed forms. And I'm looking I'm looking too as I'm talking to you all, and I'm noticing especially in the one on the right, the way it almost seems as if the glaze were just like running down the sides, like almost as if it were just dripping or oozing down. The piece in the middle, I wonder if she might have used some sort of like splattering technique, because it seems like some of the things I see on the surface look like splatters. The one on the left, I see some more like fine, precise lines there. So, and I'll have Noni share with us a little bit about these. I'm also going to remind Noni, if she can, to flip her camera back around, so we can see you as you're sharing more with us.
Thank you, and I think I did. But I'm still seeing the pottery up here. But I think you're absolutely right. There was dripping on the right. In the center, there were some brush strokes, some very gestural brush strokes, in which she sort of just slides a brush over the course of the piece. That might cause some spraying or some splatter, like you saw on the piece as well, because of the very loose brush strokes. And the other, she is definitely known to have used her fingers to stop the glaze from pouring things on and stopping the glaze, using a tool to stop the glaze to get those sharper edges that you saw. But she really liked seeing the flow of the glaze and seeing if she could coax that out, but also control it at the same time.
Okay, well, we talked a lot about Toshiko's ceramics, and like we mentioned earlier, that is what she was, primarily known for. But she was equally innovative in her work in weaving and painting, and then later bronze casting. So Noni's actually going to move us a little further into the exhibition, show us some of the other works, to give us an understanding of Toshiko as a multimedia artist.
Great. Well, here I've walked into the center room of the gallery, and right behind me, we have a real masterwork by Toshiko in weaving. And I'm going to come up really close to this piece because I want you to get a sense of the depth of this piece. It is knotted pieces of wool pile and nylon and silk as well on a base weft. And each piece is about 6 inches deep. And I'm going to turn this around to give you a sense of that. Here, you can see a sense of the show as we have it here. And here, a real close-up of this piece. Each of those pieces, she individually tied on to create this very shaggy, woolly piece that has so much movement and so much texture in it. To me, one of the fascinating things about Toshiko is that she learned from each media. She took techniques from one media and put them and used them in another media. So this piece that now that you're seeing in the slide, you can see the sort of painterly brush strokes of color as it goes across. And here she's sort of getting that same sense, but in a much more deliberate weaving technique that it took a lot of intention to do that with this knotted pile of the weaving. She worked also in painting, and some of the painting that we have in the gallery is on the other side of the gallery. We have one here. I'm trying to figure out where my finger is. There it is. That one is called Painting B, and you can see it is very much the same colors as the weaving that you just saw. A lot of those bright yellows, bright blues really come from her time in Hawaii. And then here's another painting over here called Murasaki. And I think that Lauren's going to pull up a slide so you can see that a little bit better. And when you look at the painting, it's very much like she glazed a painting rather than putting paint on. She layered. You can feel all the different layers of paint on this piece, especially in the bottom section. And then notice in the top section where you have the drips, but they're going sideways or they're going up. It's not how gravity works. So it shows us that she treated her paintings like her pottery, and she turned them around. She played with them. She wanted to give you that sort of unsettling, dizzying feel of where are these drips going. So she's using techniques from pottery and painting. She's using techniques from painting and weaving. So she really was, innovating on many different levels.
Well, I have one other slide I can pull up, Noni, that shows one of the Toshiko working with bronze, and I'll go ahead and pull that
wonderful!
Up if you
Great.
Tell us a little bit about that one.
Great. That's another medium that she worked with. And here you can see, here she is. She started working in bronze in her 90s. She was invited to work at an atelier near her home. And she decided to cast some of her larger ceramic sculptures. And to make bronze, you cast it. You have your original piece that you want to replicate. You cast it in wax. And then you use the wax model to cast the bronze off of. But Toshiko wanted to get the sense of her sort of spontaneous glazing in bronze, which is really hard to do. So here she is. She's melted the bronze. She's using molten wax to drip it all over this wax mold for the piece. So the final product, such as you might see on the right in the other slide, has the sense of being glazed. It has that same sense of sort of gesture and movement, but in the very hard form and it's in relief in bronze.
Well, I think earlier, as you were sort of turning the camera and giving everybody a view of sort of the whole gallery, I hope everybody really got a good look at the installation. And
we can do
more. Actually take a minute to to talk a little bit because if you that is not what the gallery typically looks like. We don't always have this winding pathway down the middle of the gallery. This was something that Noni worked with a whole team of people here at the museum to plan and design this installation. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about where the inspiration came for this.
Sure. The inspiration came from Toshiko herself. And here you see the central platform with this winding platform down the middle. Toshiko was innovative in numerous ways, not only in working in multimedia, but she also was innovative in how she displayed her works. Starting around the 1970s, she started showing works in communication with each other, in conversation, to create a new sort of overall work. So here you get a sense of, we sort of took inspiration from one of her dry riverbeds, where she put different shaped moons and river stones that she has here, these smaller, rounder pieces, and she put them in communication with each other to give that sense. She was very much, I see somebody wrote, inspired by nature. Absolutely. She was very much inspired by nature. And here you get a look at one of her, a period piece of how she displayed her work on one of the dry riverbeds in the bottom left. In the top right, how she started showing her works before she went into the more immersive installation display style. And then at the top, where she really was towards the end of her career, she started making the really big pieces, such as you see here. And she's walking among this group called the Star Series. in a farm near her home. And her whole goal was that people could walk in and around the works and really relate your body and your space to the objects themselves. That makes it a little hard for us in the space, in the gallery. We don't want our visitors walking in and around the objects, but this central platform with its winding curve is trying to give people that feeling of that sort of immersive display, how the works relate to each other and how they relate to also the other media in the room, in the gallery.
Great, thank you. I'm glad we got to have a good look at it around the whole gallery space. That was nice. I think we're starting to get to the conclusion of our program today. So if folks want to think about any last questions or other observations you'd like to share with us, feel free to add those to the chat. And I'm going to pop in the chat one more time the link to our teaching resources. And one just little kind of final fun fact about Toshiko's artwork. One of the videos that you'll find in our resources is a very short video clip that actually allows you to hear the sounds that some of these closed form artworks make. So while I put that link in the chat one more time for everyone, Noni, could you tell us how it is that these closed forms have an element of sound?
And that's another really innovative aspect of Toshiko and her career, is that she started incorporating sound in her work starting in the 1960s. And the kinds of installation art that I was talking about and the use of sound is really common among contemporary artists today. But she was doing it so long ago, 50, 60 years ago, way ahead of her time. And the sound, it totally happened by accident. She was closing one of the closed forms, closing the top of it, and trimming a little piece, and it fell inside. And usually when that happens, the piece would stick to the side because the clay is still a little wet and you'd think nothing of it. But somehow this piece of clay managed to stay separate. And when she took it out of the kiln, she started moving it around to do the, and heard the sound and got really, really intrigued by the sound and how it gave voice to the interior section, the dark interior that you can't see. And she was always interested in the interior side and its sort of being and its voice, and they hear her rattles. So she started intentionally putting little pieces of balls of clay into her pots, wrapping them in paper so they wouldn't stick. The paper would burn off in the kiln, and then you would have this sound. That's hard for us to show to a visitor. So we recorded some of these sounds, and we are playing them in the gallery to give people a sense of what they are like, while asking them not to try to pick up the pieces and figure that out themselves. And one thing I wanted to note, I've noticed in the I've noticed in the chat there were several mentions about her titles, and I think that the great observation. Her titles are all over the map. Sometimes she uses Japanese words, like one of the paintings we saw was called Murasaki, which is simply purple. She uses Hawaiian words, such as the large weaving behind me, ow, ow, ao, dash, ao, has multiple meanings in the Hawaiian language. I saw one that was put up here, light, daylight, dawn, exactly, but also the coast of the place or the boundary of something. We had a Native Hawaiian participant in our community group that helped me create this exhibition. And she wrote a label about this piece that defines ow ow in Native Hawaiian. And it really helps us understand her thinking. But then another member of the group said, well, wait a minute, ow, just A-O, is blue in Japanese. So we think she was playing with words. She was playing with her different backgrounds and her different identities with the Hawaiian interpretation as well as the Japanese interpretation. She also used very modernist terms sometimes. Another painting in this gallery, I pointed out the blue and yellow painting is called Painting B, which is a very nondescript sort of word. So when she did title works, it was all over the map, and they really show a range of her background and her different influences that were part of her life.
Great, thank you. I was going to point out the comments that were coming on the chat too. So I'm glad we had time to address those. It is time for us to wrap up for today. So just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us and looking at these artworks today. Thank you, Noni, for sharing with us about Toshiko. And we hope you'll join us. We have another program coming up here from the MFA in a couple of weeks that's on contemporary African American artists. So we hope you'll join us for that. And we hope everyone has a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.